Making his triumphant return today, defiant and triumphant, I would say, to the David Pakman Show, is Andrew Yang, entrepreneur turned politician, author of the new book Forward: Notes on the Future of Our Democracy, which I was glad to take a look at a couple weeks ago when you sent it to me. Former Democratic presidential primary candidate, former New York City mayoral candidate. I mean, there's just so much to talk about, but it's great having you back on.
Thanks, David. It's great to be here. It's been so long, been far too long.
It has. So, you and I, we have many things in common and many things not in common. One of the things we have in common is we are
We
pragmatists.
both run for president, David. Is that what happened?
I can't. I'm a naturalized citizen, so I cannot do it. That is something unless the law changes, I will never be able to do, sadly. But in our pragmatism, I think we both prioritize solving problems, and that comes through in the book. It came through in your presidential campaign, etc. To solve problems, we've got to figure out what created the problem. So, to what do you attribute the current division that exists politically in the United States?
In a word, David, incentives. But one of the things I found in researching and writing my book was that this is not normal. We are not in normal times. If you rewind a number of decades, well, if you go way back to the founding of the country, then they're not fans of political parties. The Republican Party comes about in the wake of the Civil War, starts out as the Northern anti-slavery party. But the two parties, despite trading power back and forth for about 100 years, were kind of indistinguishable ideologically until the 1960s reorganizes things somewhat with the civil rights movement. And then you have the end of the Fairness Doctrine, the beginning of cable TV in the 90s. And so the two parties have started diverging ideologically and politically really over the last 30, 40 years or so. And that's given rise to the urban rural divide, the educated, less educated divide. But all of the political incentives now are around the extremes because 83% plus of the congressional races are decided in the primary. So in each party, in order to get reelected, you just want to not get primaried, which means you're going to be trying to keep people off your back in the extreme flank of your party. See this very clearly with the Republicans, where if someone says a bad word about Trump, they then get attacked and cast out. So you have these political incentives around the extremes, and then you have media incentives compounding those extremes by separating us into ideological armed camps at this point. And then you have social media on top of it. So this is why we feel like we're careening towards political violence and worse. And I just want to commend folks like you because I do see independent media as the antidote. Like you
Hmm.
all aren't as ideological or inflammatory in many cases. Of course, there are people that are like that, but not you, David. so that the polarization we're feeling is now a very predictable result of all of the political and media incentives that are driving the system.
Okay, I mostly, small issues I could take with that, but for our discussion today, basically agree with the assessment. So we then get to the forward movement, the forward party, bridging this gap, finding something that maybe can cross the traditional party lines that more people can agree with. First question is, what is it that you think would be appealing to people from these two sometimes ideological extremes, sometimes just ideological differences?
Well, I would say that polarization is a bad thing for everyone. Let's say you're on the left and you'd like to get something done on climate change, and you
Right.
look up and you're like, why can we not get anything done on climate change? A Republican senator said something to me that really hit home. She said, Andrew, we get rewarded more for keeping an issue around than resolving it. And the example I've been using is Marco Rubio suggesting immigration reform, and then he gets shivved by the Republican Party. It's like, never mind, nothing to see. So if you are on the left and you're like, why can't we do things that 60, 70, 75% of us want? Then you'd want to try and reform this system to become more rational and more responsive to the desire of the majority of us. And you could go down the list on issues. You go immigration, you go climate
Well, let's
change.
take climate change. I mean, so I think this is where we might have our first disagreement. Completely agree with you that the system, by explicitly and implicitly, with things like the term limits that we have, almost always having to be campaigning for your next election, all these different things don't prioritize solutions to long-term problems like climate change. I agree with everything you said. And yet, part of climate change is a huge portion of one side doesn't believe it's real, or if they do, they don't believe humans are a factor. So this is where I get to your analysis is great. I don't think it accounts for it's more than that when one side simply won't accept the science. How do you get those people to buy in?
All right, so let's play this out.
Yeah.
What proportion of Americans don't believe that climate change is real or caused by humans?
The last I've seen, it's I wish I had the data in front of me. I think it's about half or 60% of Republicans don't believe it's caused by humans, and maybe 25, 33%, something like that, don't believe it's even happening at all.
Yeah, so that lines up with what I thought the numbers were roughly. So let's imagine that you have like gross numbers, 35% of Americans who either don't think climate change is caused by humans or it's not a big deal or whatever it is. And that percentage is declining happily or unhappily because it's becoming so apparent around us.
Yeah.
So right now you have a Republican Party that is motivated by that, let's call it for argument's sake, roughly half of the Republican Party or a bit more does not think climate change is something we should do anything about.
Sure.
The problem is that relative minority ends up controlling the agenda for half of the country and then can stall any real move to change it.
Yes.
So let's say hypothetically, instead of having two parties, we had four parties or five parties. And you had progressive Democrats, moderate Democrats, forwardists, moderate Republicans, and conservative Republicans. And
Beautiful.
the conservative Republicans would be like, hey, climate change, bunk, let's not do a thing. But then you'd have the four other groups look up and say, we should do something about it. So what you're seeing here is not quite minority rule, but it's minority veto, or it's minority keeping anything from happening. And so this is the system as it currently is made up. So the thing that I want people to come to grips with is that politics right now is completely tribal. And you can be very, very angry at what another tribe says or feels. But the problem right now is that we only have two tribes, and it doesn't take much to gum up the works, which is why we're all losing our minds, getting more polarized and frustrated.
Yeah, and so this gets us to really a discussion of third parties. And I'm curious, I have a view as to why third parties have not become more significant at the national level. I'm curious what your view is. My view is it's essentially two things. It's not for lack of want of more options. It's not for lack of political diversity. It's not because of the desire for more political diversity in the major parties. People want that. It's two things. One, that the side whose third party does best ultimately risks being a spoiler, and people who say, I'd like a third, this is the age-old Green Party thing. I mean, this is not new, right? Oh, I like this. It probably gets the people I really don't want in power if it goes well. And number two, connected to that, how politics is financed in the United States as well. Those are, for me, the two main reasons. Why? What do you see?
In a word, incentives. So if you decide to break from the two major parties, all of a sudden you don't have capital structure, you don't have votes, you don't have media.
Yep.
And so you're in the wilderness. Now, I do want to return to you're going to mess it up for whatever team you're closer to. Mm-hmm. This is one reason why the first big move the Forward Party is making is to push for ranked choice voting combined with open primaries, because if you had ranked choice voting in an election, you could vote Green 1, Democrat 2, Republican 3, and then no one needs to worry about it. The problem right now is that the duopoly wants to stifle any competition, and it uses fear. It's like if I had a buck for every time someone said, oh, you're going to mess it up for the Democrats, even though the numbers do not make it clear that that's exactly what I'd be doing. And I have said absolutely nothing about a national race. Like, I'm trying to get things done at the local level for 22. But if you were to shift to ranked choice voting, then the spoiler effect disappears, which is exactly why we need it, and also exactly why the duopoly doesn't want to talk about it. Because to your point, At this point, a majority of Americans want to move on from the duopoly. We know it's not working, but we just keep being told we can't have it because of this archaic voting system that we could change. If enough of us got together to say, look, let's just do everything by ranked choice voting, no more spoiler effect. But the parties don't want that because the parties know that we actually don't like them very much. That the only reason we're choosing A is because they're trying to scare us about B.
So the question then becomes, how do you, I mean, this is sort of like when an elected official says, as soon as I get in, I'm going to do voting, election reform and campaign finance reform. It's like, hold on a second. You're going to come to power under the system we have and then change the system that worked to get you in power, to go to incentives. It doesn't seem like you'll be super incentivized to do that. The same question sort of applies here. If we need to make the changes you're talking about to campaign finance and how votes are counted first past the post in order to make the third party more reasonable, more viable, how are we going to make those changes?
So the Forward Party has two major endeavors in 2022.
Okay.
Number one is that, and it turns out because the political parties are made up, that we could actually get together and change to an open primary ranked choice voting at the state level.
Yes.
In 24 states around the country if just enough of us got together. And for people who think like, oh, this will never happen, it happened last year in one state, Alaska, 2020, changed from party primaries to open primaries and ranked choice voting. And you immediately saw the result when Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska voted to impeach Donald Trump, the only Republican senator to do so who's up for re-election in 2022. Her approval rating among Alaskan Republicans is now 6%. So it is genuinely politically suicidal for a Republican to go against Trump. But she can skip the party primary. It doesn't exist anymore. You have an open primary, so she can take her case to the entire Alaskan public and then say, look, like, I'm an independent person, bring me back. So if we make the same change that Alaska made in 3, 4, 5 states around the country in 2022, imagine 6, 8, 10 senators, some of them Republican, who are then free of the thrall of their party, free to do what they think is right. Maybe they'll even support protecting secretaries of state from election interference. This is something we can do if we had enough Americans get together and do what they did in Alaska. So that's step one, which we don't have to wait for anyone to do. We can do it right now if there are enough of us. So that's what the Forward Party is about, trying to gather that movement. The second thing is we can support candidates who are fighting on principle as Democrats, Independents, or Republicans. And I'm just going to call out someone who I doubt people in your program talk much about. There is a West Virginia congressman named David McKinley who co-sponsored a cash relief bill that I lobbied for and voted yes on infrastructure. He's one of the 13 Republicans to do so. He's now facing a fight with a Trumper. And who the heck is going to help David McKinley? Like, the Democrats would be like, oh, he's a Republican, so screw it. But I'm going to suggest that a lot of Americans should be getting behind David McKinley and some other reasonable Republicans who are endangered species because they're taking flack for doing the right thing.
So that's interesting. So you mentioned a Republican. Is there a prominent Democrat right now that people in my audience might know that you think is particularly suited and tailored for the milieu of the Forward Party, as you describe it?
I believe Elizabeth Warren came out as pro-ranked choice voting when it was up on the ballot in Massachusetts last year. So anyone who's for ranked choice voting, I'm excited about. And there are a number of prominent Democrats and democracy reformers who have taken that stance. I think Corey might have done so as well.
I'm really curious about the coalition that you envision to some degree. You know, when I told my audience that you were going to be on, the most frequent question I got in different iterations was, who exactly that currently considers themselves to be on the right does Andrew Yang imagine bringing into the Forward Party? And to kind of make it a little more specific, you know, we would imagine that there's lots of progressive Democrats, more centrist Democrats, even some folks who really consider themselves centrist, maybe in the kind of line of even like a John McCain, who like the idea of some of the reforms you're talking about. And that all kind of makes sense to me. When I think about people who believe Donald Trump won the election, vaccines, the COVID vaccine magnetizes you, causes autism, whatever the case may be, et cetera, right? You know the package of ideas that I'm talking about. One, are those people that would even conceivably say this forward party idea that Andrew Yang proposes in a coalition with the left makes sense? And number two, are these even people that you want as part of your coalition?
First, let me say I want everyone as part of the coalition. If you can vote, we can disagree on a lot of things. It's all to the good. If we agree on the fact that this duopoly is not working, it's designed to turn us against each other and sink us. So that's one of the principles of the Forward Party is that, look, I can disagree with you on a lot of stuff, but if we can make common cause on this, then we can go back to disagreeing when the democracy is actually set up to succeed, when they're,
So let me ask, so even, to make it really specific, if people on the right say the Republican Party is too centrist, I'm an extreme white supremacist or something like that, but I think we need to get, we need single transferable vote or whatever and campaign. You still welcome that because you're on the same page on that one issue?
Yeah, if they're going to help us transition to a more effective democracy, I don't need to know what their stance is on things that I disagree with. People have a sense of where I'm coming from.
Okay.
But right now, I believe that there is an existential threat to the country as a result of the greatest design flaw in the history of the world. That is, and if you will help us resolve that design flaw, then we can have a discussion about anything else under the sun. At a time when the democracy actually will stand the test of time, when we transition to a multi-party system where you can't make any autocratic or authoritarian decisions, you have to somehow get 2 or 3 other parties on board.
Okay, all right, fair. So on the question of is everyone literally welcome, the answer is yes. That's fine. That's legitimate. So that's clear. Now, in terms of to whom that currently typically votes for Republicans would this appeal? Where are you on that?
There are all sorts of folks who are displeased with Trump. There's a person online who said the other day, it's like, look, I voted for Trump twice, and I don't even want him back. Like there are voters out there who are concerned about the country, and I've been heartened by the fact that I've gotten a lot of incoming expressions of support from military veterans, members of law enforcement or former law enforcement who despair about the state of the country. They see where it's going to, and they say, this is what I've been waiting for. There's an independent community that right now is politically homeless. They're very numerous. There are 44% of Americans consider themselves independents. And I would say that we're seeing a lot of them come in like that. One of the things I'm going to suggest, first, if you look at the appetite for a third party, it's higher among both Republicans and independents than Democrats. So if you imagine who's going to draw third party energy, or where it's going to come from, like by the numbers, it's likely to come from those groups. And imagining that every Republican or former Republican or independent is excited about Trump is just not right, but saying that group is also open to Democrats is also not right. I have encountered so many Americans who just shut down when you have a D next to your name,
sure,
which I found unfortunate. But the thing I want to suggest to people is that, again, all politics is tribal at this point. And so what we need to do is we need to have more tribes emerge so that we have a chance. If we stick to 2 tribes, we're not.
Last thing I want to ask you about, and we're shifting gears a little bit, but because of your background in technology, I'm very curious as to your insights, particularly as someone who used social media really effectively in the Democratic primary run that you made. All the talk now about the so-called regulation of social media. One interesting artifact of this has been the rapidity with which those who have for a long time claimed businesses should be able to do whatever they want as long as it's not illegal are now demanding that social media companies be forced to allow messages that violate their terms of service to be up. That's a hypocrisy we could talk about, but I don't want to focus on that necessarily today. What I'm curious about from your perspective is what should be the regulatory infrastructure as to the social networks, particularly from this point of view of political bias that Don Jr., whoever else are regularly tweeting about and sort of saying we are the victims here. What would you like to see?
I think our government needs to modernize its approach to social media and technology in general. Right
Hmm.
now, it's behind the curve. It's laughable or embarrassing. This is also an outgrowth of our gerontocracy, David. I mean, the reality is that our congressional leaders are in their 70s or 80s. If it is Biden versus Trump in 24, which it looks like it's going in that direction, their combined age will be 158.
Yeah.
So then asking our government to understand what's going on in social media is, at least right now, a bridge too far, and like that has to change. If I were in charge, I would be getting into the guts of these social media companies, setting what Jonathan Haidt suggested as like a filter where you end up being able to just like ignore people who are customarily aggressive, obnoxious. I mean, you can watch it if you want or get those messages if you want, but you actually set up a way to reward people who tend to be more balanced and normal in their conversation.
Okay.
Because now the energy in social media rewards the more aggressive or sensationalistic. You're self-accepted again. You just like keep it even keeled, and yet everyone loves you.
Well, you should see the emails I get. But so it sounds like you're not saying you would be in favor of the government going to YouTube and saying you've got to leave up anti-vaccine content.
Oh, there are certain things that you'd have to say are in the public good, that and there's disinformation that can be destructive in a way that, like if you're functioning society, you do not want to say like every idea is the same, including ideas that, by the way, in this case, could lead people to lose their lives.
So in other words, you want to make it easier to control one's experience on these platforms, but not take the approach that some on the right are saying, which is these platforms should be forced to allow content that violates their terms of service. Again, as long as it's not illegal on the basis of discrimination on race or sex or this type of thing.
Well, I'm going to echo what some of the social media CEOs themselves say, which is like, why are we in position to make this decision? And the reason they're making that decision is because the government is absent. One of the social media CEOs said, look, we should get together, tech, government, media, nonprofits, and set rules of the road so it's not just us doing the content moderation decision, then you yelling at us about it. Because wherever they draw the line, they're going to get yelled at. I happen to think that conservatives are off base in terms of saying like, oh, you're sledging conservative content. It's like conservative content actually performs great on a lot of these platforms.
Yeah.
And if there's anything we should be concerned about, it's the deteriorating mental health of our young people, teenage girls in particular. So if you're a conservative, like get mad about that in my mind.
Right.
It's like
Yeah.
your daughter's being depressed. Like, isn't that a bigger issue than the fact that, anyway.
And I guess then the question would become, if Facebook knew that was going on and was hiding it for a period of time, are they really good faith players to be involved in figuring out the regulation, which is sort of a second order question?
Well, they can be at the table, but we should stop pretending that companies are going to do anything other than what's going to maximize their financial returns, which is exactly what you'd expect them to do. So, so if you have that expectation and then you go in and say, hey, guess what? We're going to do things that are going to make your financial returns lower, and tough luck. And so one thing I suggested as like a random thing, it's like maybe Instagram should turn off for teenagers between midnight and 7 a.m. Like, maybe just looking at pictures of your high school classmates is something we don't want you to do in the middle of the night. Like just like a random thought. And so you can see that kind of like, would Facebook be excited about that? Of course not. They'd be like, oh, we make money then. We make money all the time.
Right.
It's like, well.
The book is Forward, Notes on the Future of Our Democracy. I really appreciate reading the book, and we've been speaking with the book's author, Andrew Yang. Always great having you on, and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, David. Great to be back.